Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Cozy English podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is how to train your brain to think in English instead of translating from your native language. So, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. Can I ask you something before we begin? Don't answer me immediately. I want you to think about it for just a few seconds. When someone asks you a simple question in English like, "What did you do yesterday?" What happens inside your mind? Do you answer immediately? Or does your brain become completely silent for a moment? Maybe you know the answer. Maybe you know every word. Maybe you even learned the grammar years ago, but somehow nothing comes out. And then your brain starts working like a translator. Yesterday. Yesterday means, I went. How do I say market? Yes, I went to the market. Wait, should I use go or went? Oh no, everybody is waiting. By the time you finally create the sentence, the conversation has already moved on. If this has ever happened to you, then today's episode might completely change the way you learn English. Because today, I'm not going to teach you new vocabulary. I'm not going to teach you another grammar rule. I'm not even going to tell you to memorize hundreds of sentences. Instead, I'm going to show you something much more important. I'm going to show you how to train your brain. Because speaking English is not only about knowing English. It's about teaching your brain to use English automatically. And those are two very different things. Have you ever noticed something strange? When you ride a bicycle, do you think, balance left foot, right foot, now push the pedal, now keep your body straight? Of course not. Your body simply knows what to do. When you drive a car, do you consciously remember every instruction from your driving school? No. Your brain has already built those connections. You simply drive. Speaking a language works exactly the same way. Fluent speakers are not faster because they know more grammar. They're faster because their brain doesn't stop to ask permission before speaking. Their thoughts become words almost automatically. That's the secret. And today, we're going to build that habit together.
Anna, can I be honest? Sometimes I feel really frustrated. I watch English movies. I understand English podcasts. I can read English articles without much difficulty. But the moment someone says, "Tell me something about yourself," my mind becomes completely blank. It's almost embarrassing. Sometimes I even know the sentence. I just can't say it quickly. Why does this happen? Does it mean I'm not good at English?
No, Alex, and I wish more English learners understood this. The problem is not your English. The problem is your brain's habit. Your brain has been trained for years to do something that feels completely natural. Translate. Think about your entire school life. A teacher wrote an English sentence, then immediately explained it in your native language. You memorized vocabulary with meanings. You translated paragraphs. You solved grammar exercises. Everything depended on translation. So your brain learned an important lesson. It learned that English is not a language. It learned that English is a puzzle. A puzzle that must first be translated before it can be understood. Now imagine doing that during a real conversation. Someone asks you, "How was your weekend?" Instead of answering, your brain secretly starts translating. Every single sentence. Every single word, every single idea, and translation takes time. Conversation doesn't. That's why you feel slow. Not because you're unintelligent, not because your memory is weak, not because your pronunciation is terrible. Simply because your brain is following the only method it has practiced for years. Here's the exciting part. Brains can learn new habits every single day. Scientists call this neuroplasticity. I call it good news. Because it means the way your brain works today doesn't have to be the way it works 6 months from now. You can actually retrain it. You can teach it to stop translating. You can teach it to think directly in English. And once that starts happening, speaking becomes lighter, faster, more natural, almost effortless. Not overnight, but much sooner than most people imagine. And that's exactly what we're going to begin doing today. Not by forcing ourselves to speak faster, but by teaching our brain a completely new way to process English. Because once your brain changes, your English changes with it.
So you're saying, I've been practicing English for years, but I've actually been training my brain in the wrong way. Maybe the real problem isn't my English. Maybe it's the habit my brain has built. That honestly makes me feel hopeful, because habits can change. And if habits can change, then maybe I can finally become someone who doesn't panic every time I have to speak English.
Exactly, Alex. And I want everyone listening to remember one sentence. Not because it's beautiful, but because it's true. Your mouth speaks only what your brain has already learned to do. If your brain learns to translate, your mouth will always wait. If your brain learns to think in English, your mouth will finally begin to speak. And today, that training begins.
Anna, can I tell you something strange? A few weeks ago, I met a tourist who had been learning my language for only 8 months. His grammar wasn't perfect. Sometimes he chose the wrong word. Sometimes his pronunciation sounded funny. But do you know what surprised me? He never stopped speaking. He never looked scared. He laughed, made mistakes, corrected himself, and continued talking as if nothing had happened. Then I looked at myself. I've studied English for years. I know more grammar than he knows about my language. I know hundreds of words. I can even explain grammar rules to someone else. But if an English speaker suddenly asks me a question, I become nervous. Why does someone with less knowledge speak more confidently than someone who has studied for years? I've never been able to understand that.
Alex, that's one of the most important questions an English learner can ask. And the answer has almost nothing to do with English. It has everything to do with your brain. Let me explain. Imagine there are 2 doors in front of you. The first door says, speak perfectly. The second door says, communicate your idea. Most English learners spend years trying to open the first door. Every sentence becomes an examination. Every word feels like a test. Every conversation feels like an interview. Your brain keeps asking questions before you even open your mouth. Is this tense correct? Should I use a or the? What if I pronounce this word incorrectly? What if they laugh? What if I sound stupid? Now tell me, how can anyone speak naturally while answering 10 silent questions every 3 seconds? You can't. Your brain becomes busy protecting you instead of helping you communicate. The tourist you met? His brain was playing a completely different game. He wasn't trying to sound educated. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He had only one mission: be understood. That's it. His brain wasn't searching for perfect English. It was searching for connection. And that's why he sounded confident. Confidence is not the result of perfect English. Confidence is the result of giving your brain permission to continue speaking.
Wait, are you saying confidence comes first? I always believed confidence would come after I became fluent. I thought one day I would suddenly know enough English, and then confidence would magically appear.
That's what almost everyone believes, but life keeps proving the opposite. Look around you. Have you ever met someone who speaks confidently even though their English isn't perfect? Of course you have. Now think about someone who knows excellent English but speaks very little. You've probably met that person too. Knowledge and confidence are not twins. Sometimes they don't even live in the same house. because confidence isn't built from grammar books. It's built from experience. Your brain starts believing something only after it experiences it many times. Think about your first day at a new school. Everything felt unfamiliar. You noticed every face, every classroom, every sound. You probably felt uncomfortable. But after a few months, you walked through those same hallways without thinking. Nothing had changed. The building was the same. The teachers were the same. The students were the same. The only thing that changed was your brain. It stopped treating that place as something dangerous. English speaking works exactly the same way. Your brain treats speaking English like walking into an unfamiliar place. It becomes alert. It becomes cautious. It slows everything down. Not because English is dangerous, but because your brain thinks uncertainty might be dangerous. And your brain has one job: to protect you. Sometimes it protects you so much that it prevents you from growing.
That's unbelievable. So when I stay silent, my brain thinks it's helping me.
Exactly. Silence feels safe. Speaking feels risky. Your brain loves safety. But here's the problem. Everything you want is outside that safety. Think about a child learning to walk. If that child said, "I'll start walking only after I'm sure I won't fall," would the child ever walk? Never. Falling isn't proof of failure. It's proof that learning has started. The same thing happens with English. Every awkward conversation, every forgotten word, every small mistake, every sentence you wish you had said better, those are not signs that you're bad at English. Those are signs that your brain is collecting experience. Every conversation teaches your brain, "I survived. No one laughed. The world didn't end. I can do this again." Slowly your brain stops sending fear signals. It starts sending confidence instead. Not fake confidence, real confidence. The kind that grows quietly after hundreds of tiny experiences.
I think I finally understand something. Maybe I've spent too much time trying to avoid mistakes, instead of trying to become comfortable with speaking. Maybe I've been protecting my confidence, instead of building it.
That's a beautiful realization, Alex, and I'd like everyone listening to try something today. The next time you speak English, don't ask yourself, "Did I speak perfectly?" Ask yourself, "Did the other person understand what I wanted to say?" Those two questions create two completely different learners. One learner spends years chasing perfection. The other spends years becoming a communicator. And here's the funny part. The communicator usually becomes fluent first, because language has never been a competition about perfect sentences. Language has always been about one human mind reaching another. The moment your brain understands that, everything begins to change. Before I ask you my next question, I want you to do something unusual. Don't answer me, just listen. As you're listening to my voice right now, are there any words inside your head? Not spoken words, not words that anyone else can hear. The quiet words. The silent conversations that happen only inside your mind. Maybe you're thinking, "She's right." Or maybe you're thinking, "I'm not sure about this." Perhaps you're wondering what you'll have for dinner later. Perhaps you're remembering something that happened this morning. Whatever it is, your brain is already talking. Every single day, from the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep, your mind is having thousands of conversations. The strange thing is, almost none of us ever notice them. They're automatic, they're constant, they're invisible. Now here's the question that changed the way I looked at language forever. What if those silent conversations could happen in English instead? Not all at once. Not perfectly. Just one thought at a time. Because here's the truth. Fluent English speakers don't spend their entire day speaking English. Most of the time, they're simply thinking. and the language they think in becomes the language they speak.
I've never looked at it that way. Whenever someone says, think in English, I immediately imagine doing something difficult. I picture myself sitting in a room, closing my eyes, and forcing my brain to create complicated English sentences. It sounds exhausting, honestly. It sounds impossible.
That's because most people misunderstand what thinking in English really means. They imagine it has to be complicated, but your brain doesn't naturally think in long speeches. It thinks in tiny moments. Let's imagine it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Your alarm rings. Do you immediately think, today I shall proceed toward the kitchen in order to prepare breakfast before beginning my daily responsibilities? Of course not. Your thoughts are much simpler. I'm still sleepy. 5 more minutes. I need coffee. Where's my phone? That's how real thinking works. Short, natural, honest. Your brain isn't writing an essay. It's simply reacting to life. And that's exactly how English should enter your mind. Not through difficult paragraphs, through ordinary moments.
So you're saying, I don't have to wait until I'm fluent before I start thinking in English. I can begin with tiny thoughts.
Exactly. In fact, that's the only way it works. Imagine someone decides to go to the gym for the very first time. They walk in and immediately try to lift the heaviest weight in the room. What happens? Their body gives up. Not because they're weak, because they skipped the beginning. Your brain follows the same rule. If you suddenly force yourself to think about politics, science, or philosophy in English, your brain becomes tired. Then it quietly says, this is too difficult, and you stop. But imagine something different. You're standing near your window. It's raining. Instead of saying nothing, your brain quietly notices, it's raining today. That's it. A single thought. No pressure. No dictionary. No grammar test. Just one simple observation. Then you're looking for your keys. Your brain whispers, where did I leave them? Later you're waiting for a bus. It's taking longer today. You're cooking dinner. This smells really good. You're charging your phone. The battery was almost dead. Can you see what's happening? You're no longer studying English. You're living in English. And that's a completely different experience.
That actually sounds peaceful. I've always imagined English practice as something that needed a notebook, a textbook, a teacher, or a classroom. I never imagined it could happen while making tea or waiting in line at a supermarket.
That's because we've been taught that learning only happens while we're studying. But your brain doesn't care whether you're sitting in a classroom or tying your shoes. It learns from repetition. Think about your own name. Nobody asks you to remember it. You don't revise it every Sunday. You don't practice writing it 100 times every month, yet you'll never forget it. Why? Because your brain has met it thousands of times. Not because someone forced you to memorize it, because life repeated it naturally. That's exactly how we should train English. Not by creating stress, by creating frequency. Small English thoughts, again, again, and again. Until your brain stops treating English as a foreign visitor and starts treating it like an old friend who quietly stays with you throughout the day.
I think I finally understand why my English disappears during conversations. I've only invited English into my life when it's time to study. The rest of the day, my brain completely forgets it exists. Then suddenly I expect it to perform perfectly when someone asks me a question. That's like expecting a musician to give a concert after touching the piano only once a week.
Exactly. Your brain speaks the language it spends time with, not the language it occasionally visits. So here's a challenge for everyone listening. For the next 24 hours, don't try to become fluent. Don't try to impress anyone. Don't even try to speak long sentences. Simply notice your life, every ordinary moment, every small action, every tiny observation. And whenever you remember, allow one quiet English thought to appear. One is enough. Because one thought becomes 10, 10 become 50, 50 become hundreds. And one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, you'll discover something wonderful. Your brain stopped translating. It simply started talking. And that's the moment English stops feeling like a subject and starts feeling like part of who you are. Alex, I'd like to try a little experiment with you. Don't say anything, just listen carefully. I'm going to mention a few things. A candle, a mountain, a puppy running across a green field, a cup of hot coffee on a rainy morning. Now tell me, what happened inside your mind? Did you see words or did you see pictures?
Pictures. Immediately, I didn't read the word mountain inside my head. I actually imagined a mountain. I could almost see it.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest secrets about the human brain. Your brain doesn't naturally think in dictionaries. It thinks in images. When I say ocean, your brain doesn't open an imaginary vocabulary book. It creates a scene. Maybe blue water, maybe waves, maybe the sound of seagulls, maybe the feeling of standing on a beach. Your brain is incredibly visual. But here's where many English learners accidentally make life harder for themselves. Instead of connecting English words directly to pictures, they connect English words to another language first. Imagine your brain as a traveler. It wants to go from picture to English, but you've built an unnecessary bridge in the middle. Picture native language English. Every conversation becomes a longer journey. Every sentence takes an extra stop, and every extra stop costs time. That's why your speaking feels delayed, not because your brain is slow, because it's taking the scenic route.
I never thought of it like that. It's almost like my brain refuses to walk straight. It keeps taking a detour.
Exactly. And here's something fascinating. Have you ever smelled fresh bread from a bakery? Before you even say the word bread, your brain already recognizes the smell. Or imagine hearing thunder. You don't need someone to translate it for you. You simply know what you're hearing. Life reaches your brain first. Words come later. Language should work the same way. Let's say you're holding an apple. Instead of thinking, apple means just look at it. Its color, its shape, its texture. The word apple should become attached to the object itself, not to a translation. The stronger that connection becomes, the faster your English becomes.
So, instead of collecting words like they're items on a shopping list, I should connect them to real experiences.
Exactly. Because experiences stay longer than definitions. Think about your childhood. Can you remember the smell of the first classroom you studied in? Maybe. Can you remember your favorite meal your grandmother cooked? Probably. Can you remember getting caught in heavy rain without an umbrella? I'm sure you can. Those memories stayed because they were connected to emotions. Your brain loves emotion. It loves stories. It loves experiences, but it quickly forgets information that feels lifeless. That's why some people memorize 50 new words today and forget 40 of them by next week. Their brain never found a reason to keep them. Information without experience disappears. Information with experience becomes memory.
Now I understand why I remember English words from movies much better than words from vocabulary lists. When I hear a word during an emotional scene, I never forget it.
Exactly, because your brain remembers moments, not just meanings. Think about your favorite movie. You probably don't remember every line, but you remember how a scene made you feel. That's how your brain organizes memory, not like a library, more like a collection of experiences. So if you want stronger English, don't ask yourself, how many words did I study today? Ask yourself, how many English moments did I create today? Did you notice the sky and describe it in English? Did you quietly name the things around you? Did you connect English with something real? Those tiny moments matter far more than most learners realize.
It's funny. For years I believed learning English meant adding more and more words to my notebook. But now I'm beginning to think, maybe I don't need more pages. Maybe I need more experiences.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Your notebook can teach your eyes, but your experiences teach your brain. And remember this, the goal is not to become a person who knows thousands of English words. The goal is to become a person whose brain recognizes English naturally. Because the day English becomes connected to sight, sounds, feelings, memories, and everyday life, you'll stop searching for words. The words will begin finding you. And that's when speaking starts to feel less like hard work and more like something you've been doing all along. Alex, I'd like you to remember something. Not from last week, not from last year, from when you were 3 or 4 years old. Can you remember learning your first language? Probably not. None of us can, and yet somehow every one of us became fluent. Have you ever wondered why? It's one of the greatest miracles that happens in every human life. A child doesn't own a dictionary. A child doesn't study grammar. A child doesn't memorize thousands of vocabulary words every weekend. Still, that child learns to speak. How? Not because children are smarter than adults, not because they have magical brains. They learn because they live inside the language. From morning until night, words surround them. Conversations surround them. Questions surround them. Laughter surrounds them. Stories surround them. The language becomes part of everyday life. The child doesn't chase the language. The language keeps finding the child. Now here's something interesting. The moment we become adults, we completely change the process. Instead of living with the language, we schedule it. English from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Then we close the book, close the notebook, close the app. And without realizing it, we close the language too. For the next 23 hours, English disappears from our lives. Then the next evening we open the book again and wonder, why am I still not fluent?
That feels uncomfortably true. Sometimes I study English very seriously for an hour. But after that, my entire day happens in my native language. It's almost like English only exists on my study table. The moment I leave that chair, English stays behind.
Exactly. Imagine trying to grow a plant. You water it for 1 hour every evening. But for the other 23 hours you keep pulling it out of the soil. Would it grow? Of course not. Growth needs consistency, not intensity. Your brain works in the same way. Most learners believe, if I study harder, I'll become fluent faster. Sometimes the opposite is true. Your brain doesn't need one exhausting study session. It needs thousands of gentle reminders that English is part of daily life. Think about music. You don't memorize the lyrics of your favorite song by sitting down and studying them. You hear the song while driving, while cooking, while walking, while relaxing. Again, again, and again. One day you suddenly realize you know every single line. You never forced your memory. Your memory simply had enough exposure. That's exactly how your brain loves to learn.
So maybe fluency isn't built during one perfect study session. Maybe it's built during hundreds of ordinary moments that don't even feel like studying.
Exactly, and that's a wonderful realization. because it removes so much pressure. Let me ask everyone listening something. How many times today did you unlock your phone? 10 times? 20? 50? Now imagine if just one of those moments included English. Not a lesson, not homework, just 30 seconds. One tiny moment. Your brain would receive another signal. English is still here. Then another signal. And another. Until your brain stops treating English like a weekly visitor and starts treating it like a daily companion. That's how habits are born, not with dramatic changes, with ordinary repetition.
I think I've been waiting for motivation. Every Sunday I tell myself, tomorrow I'm going to study for 3 hours. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Then I feel guilty. Then I stop completely for a few days. Then I start again. It's like I'm always beginning from the beginning.
That's because motivation is a wonderful guest but a terrible roommate. It visits, it leaves, it comes back, it disappears again. If your English depends only on motivation, your progress will always move like waves. Some days high, some days low. Instead, build something much more reliable. A habit. A habit doesn't ask, do I feel excited today? A habit simply says, this is what we do. You don't wake up every morning and debate whether to brush your teeth. You just do it, not because you're motivated, because it's become part of who you are. Now imagine English reaching that point, not something you have to remember. Something that naturally belongs in your day. That is when real change begins, not because you're working harder, but because your brain has stopped arguing with the process.
I love that idea. Instead of asking, how many hours should I study? Maybe I should ask, how can English become a normal part of my day? That question feels completely different. It doesn't sound stressful. It sounds possible.
Exactly, and sometimes changing one question changes everything. Don't ask, when will I become fluent? Ask, how can I spend one more ordinary moment with English today? Because fluency isn't built in one extraordinary day. It's built in hundreds of ordinary ones. Small conversations, small observations, small habits, small victories. They don't seem important at the time. But one day, you'll look back and realize those tiny moments quietly built the English speaker you always wanted to become. And perhaps that's the most beautiful thing about learning a language. It doesn't transform you in one dramatic moment. It transforms you so gently that one day you suddenly notice you're no longer learning English. You're simply living with it. Alex, I'd like to begin this part with a sentence that might surprise everyone listening. Fluent people do not always know more English than you. I know that sounds impossible, because we've been taught to believe that fluency belongs only to people with enormous vocabularies and perfect grammar. But let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who speaks your native language every single day, yet uses almost the same words all the time? Of course you have. Maybe it's your grandfather. Maybe it's your neighbor. Maybe it's a young child. Maybe it's even you. None of us use every word we know. In fact, most people repeat the same vocabulary again and again without realizing it. The difference isn't the number of words. The difference is how comfortably they use them. Now imagine two cooks. The first cook owns a kitchen filled with hundreds of expensive ingredients, spices from around the world, rare vegetables, special sauces, but every time someone asks him to cook, he becomes confused. He spends 20 minutes deciding what to use. The second cook has only a few simple ingredients: rice, eggs, vegetables, butter. Yet within minutes he prepares something delicious. Who would you rather learn from? The person with more ingredients or the person who actually knows how to cook? Language works exactly the same way. Owning vocabulary is not the same as using vocabulary.
That's interesting. Sometimes I save long lists of advanced English words. I tell myself, one day I'll use all of these, but honestly, months pass. And I still use the same simple words whenever I speak.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Because real conversations are surprisingly simple. Think about the last conversation you had with a friend. Did you use complicated words every minute? Probably not. You talked about food, work, family, plans, weather, movies, feelings. You repeated familiar words naturally. Conversation is not a vocabulary competition. It's the art of expressing ideas. Some learners become collectors. They collect expressions, idioms, rare vocabulary, complex grammar. Their notebooks become thicker every month, but when it's time to speak, they hesitate. Why? Because collecting is different from using. Imagine buying a beautiful guitar. You polish it every weekend. You read books about music. You watch concerts online. You learn the names of famous musicians, but you never actually play. Will you become a guitarist? Of course not. Knowledge around the skill is not the skill itself. The same is true for English. Reading about speaking is not speaking. Watching others speak is not speaking. Highlighting vocabulary is not speaking. Only speaking trains speaking.
That reminds me of something. Sometimes I finish watching an English learning video and I feel productive. But later I realize, I didn't actually say a single sentence myself. I learned, but I didn't practice.
Exactly, and your brain knows the difference. Imagine watching hundreds of swimming videos. You learn every technique. You understand every movement. You know exactly how professionals breathe underwater. Then someone asks, "Can you swim?" You answer, "I've watched 200 videos." Would anyone believe you're a swimmer? No, because your brain builds confidence through experience, not observation. English follows the same rule. Your brain becomes fluent by participating, not by watching from the audience. And here's something that many learners need to hear. Your first goal is not to sound impressive. Your first goal is to become comfortable. Comfort creates speed. Speed creates confidence. Confidence creates fluency. Notice the order. Fluency is the result, not the beginning.
So maybe I've been climbing the staircase from the wrong side. I've been trying to sound fluent first, hoping confidence would follow.
Exactly. It's like planting a tree and expecting fruit the next morning. Every tree follows its own order. First roots, then the trunk, then branches, then leaves. Only after all of that does fruit appear. If you keep checking for fruit every day, you'll become disappointed. But if you quietly care for the roots, the fruit eventually arrives on its own. Your English has roots too. Daily exposure, daily speaking, daily listening, daily thinking. Those invisible habits are feeding everything you'll become later. Never underestimate what your brain is building beneath the surface. Sometimes progress is happening even when you can't see it yet.
That's encouraging, because there are days when I honestly feel like nothing is improving. I wonder whether all this practice is even working.
And that's exactly when most people quit. Not because they can't learn English, because they mistake invisible progress for no progress. Think about bamboo. For a long time it seems like nothing is happening above the ground, but underneath its roots are spreading in every direction. Strong, deep, patient. Then one day it suddenly grows incredibly fast. People say, "Wow, it grew overnight." No, it didn't. The roots had been preparing for that moment all along. Your brain is doing something similar. Every conversation, every listening session, every tiny English thought, every small effort, your brain stores them, connects them, strengthens them. One day you'll answer a question in English without translating. You'll finish a conversation and suddenly realize I didn't stop to think. That moment won't be luck. It will be the result of hundreds of quiet moments your brain has been collecting. So never believe the myth that fluency belongs only to people who know everything. Fluency belongs to people who keep showing up. Again, and again, and again. Because your brain doesn't become fluent in one extraordinary leap. It becomes fluent through ordinary moments, repeated with extraordinary consistency. Alex, I want you to imagine two different people. The first person walks into a room full of strangers. Before saying a single word, they begin asking themselves dozens of questions. What if they don't like me? What if I say something stupid? What if I sound awkward? What if they judge me? Because of those thoughts, they stay quiet. Now imagine another person walking into the same room. They smile, they introduce themselves. They don't try to be the funniest person. They don't try to sound the smartest. They're simply interested in talking to people. Who do you think will leave that room with more conversations? Obviously, the second person. Now here's the interesting part. The difference wasn't intelligence. The difference wasn't vocabulary. The difference was that one person asked for permission, while the other simply started speaking. Your brain does exactly the same thing with English. Every time you want to speak, your brain quietly asks, am I ready? Do I know enough? Is this sentence correct? Should I wait until I can say it better? By the time your brain finishes asking for permission, the moment has disappeared. The conversation has moved on, someone else has answered, and once again you tell yourself, I missed another chance.
That happens to me all the time. Sometimes I already have the answer in my mind. But I keep changing it. I replace one word, then another. Then I wonder if there's a better expression. And suddenly, someone else starts talking. Afterward I think, that was exactly what I wanted to say. It's frustrating because I wasn't silent due to lack of knowledge. I was silent because I kept editing my own sentence.
Exactly. And do you know what that reminds me of? A photographer. Imagine a beautiful sunset. The sky is glowing with orange, pink, and purple colors. It's one of those rare evenings that everyone remembers. One photographer takes out the camera and captures the moment. Another photographer keeps adjusting the settings. A little brighter, a little darker, a different angle, a different lens, a different position. 5 minutes later, the sun is gone. The perfect picture was never taken. Not because the camera wasn't good enough, because perfection stole the moment. English speaking works exactly the same way. A conversation is alive. It keeps moving. It doesn't wait for perfect sentences. It rewards people who participate, not people who endlessly edit.
That's actually a little painful to hear, because I've done that so many times. I've edited sentences that nobody was even going to judge. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed my mistake, but I noticed it before I even spoke.
That's because your biggest critic usually isn't another person. It's the voice inside your own mind. And here's something fascinating. When children tell stories, they rarely stop halfway through and say, wait, I think I should use a different verb. They just continue. Their imagination moves faster than their fear. Somewhere along the way, many adults lose that freedom. We become editors instead of communicators. We judge every sentence before it's born. We expect every word to be polished. But language was never meant to be polished. It was meant to be shared. Imagine sitting around a campfire with your friends. Someone begins telling a funny story. Halfway through, they forget one small detail. Do you interrupt them and say, "Your storytelling skills are unacceptable"? Of course not. You're listening because you're interested in the story, not because you're grading their grammar. Most conversations in life are exactly like that. People care far more about your ideas than your tiny mistakes.
So maybe people aren't examining my English as closely as I imagined. Maybe they're just listening to what I'm trying to say.
Exactly. We often imagine an audience that doesn't actually exist. We picture invisible judges with notebooks, marking every sentence. But real conversations are different. Most people are busy thinking about their own words, their own lives, their own ideas. They're not counting your mistakes. They're connecting with you. And here's a thought I'd like everyone listening to remember. Every sentence you don't say is a sentence your brain never gets to practice. Every conversation you avoid is a conversation your brain never gets to learn from. Every time fear wins, your brain quietly says, "Avoiding English kept us safe." And it repeats that pattern the next time. But every time you speak even imperfectly, your brain receives a completely different message. We survived. People understood us. Let's do it again. That single experience is far more valuable than another hour spent worrying.
I think that's what I've been missing. I've been trying to build confidence by waiting. But waiting has never made me more confident. It has only made me more comfortable staying silent.
Exactly. Silence is a habit. Speaking is also a habit. Every day your brain is strengthening one of them. The question isn't whether you're building a habit. The question is, which habit are you building? If you speak today, your brain becomes slightly more willing to speak tomorrow. If you stay silent today, your brain becomes slightly more comfortable staying silent tomorrow. Tiny choices, repeated over time, become powerful patterns. And one day, without realizing it, you'll notice something remarkable. Someone will ask you a question in English. You won't search for permission. You won't wait for the perfect sentence. You won't negotiate with your own mind. You'll simply smile, open your mouth, and answer. Not because you've memorized every grammar rule, not because you've learned every word in the dictionary, but because your brain has finally stopped asking, "Can I speak?" It already knows the answer. Yes. Alex, I'd like to tell you a story, not about English, not about grammar, just about a little girl learning to tie her shoes. Every morning before school, her father would kneel beside her and say, "Watch carefully." He made 2 loops, crossed them, pulled them tight. The little girl watched with complete attention. The next day she tried it herself. She couldn't do it. The loops came apart. The knot became a mess. She became frustrated. The following day she tried again. Still wrong. Some mornings she laughed. Some mornings she almost cried. Sometimes she wanted her father to do it for her because it was easier. Weeks passed. Nothing seemed to change. Then one ordinary morning something happened. She picked up the laces, made the loops, crossed them, pulled them tight, and suddenly, her shoes were tied. She looked down in surprise. She couldn't even explain how she had done it. It just happened. Now here's the beautiful part. Ask that same girl 10 years later how she ties her shoes. She probably can't explain every movement, because her hands no longer think about it. They simply know. That is what your brain is trying to do with English.
So fluency isn't one magical moment. It's the result of hundreds of tiny moments that finally connect together.
Exactly. People often ask, "Anna, when will I become fluent?" And I always smile, because the funniest thing about fluency is this: most people don't notice the day it arrives. There isn't a celebration. There isn't a certificate floating down from the sky. There isn't a voice announcing, Congratulations, you are now fluent. Instead, life quietly surprises you. One day you're watching a movie, and halfway through you suddenly realize, wait, I haven't looked at the subtitles for several minutes. Another day someone asks you a question in English, and you've already answered before your brain had time to panic. A few weeks later you catch yourself laughing at an English joke immediately. No translation, no delay, just laughter. Then one evening you're walking home after work. You're thinking about tomorrow's plans. Halfway through your thoughts, you suddenly notice something unbelievable. You've been thinking in English for the last 5 minutes without even trying. Those moments don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly. So quietly that many learners almost miss them.
I've never thought about fluency that way. I've always imagined reaching some finish line. Like one morning I'd wake up and suddenly know everything. But now it sounds more like watching the sunrise. The sky changes little by little. You don't notice every second. Then suddenly, it's daylight.
That's one of the most beautiful comparisons I've ever heard. Yes, fluency is much more like a sunrise than a light switch. It doesn't happen in one dramatic second. It grows, slowly, patiently, almost invisibly. And that's exactly why so many people quit too early. They're standing outside just before sunrise, convinced the sun is never coming. If only they waited a little longer, they would see the light. Your brain works quietly. Even while you think nothing is happening, it's building connections, strengthening memories, creating faster pathways, removing hesitation, teaching itself to recognize patterns. Every English conversation leaves a tiny footprint inside your mind. One footprint doesn't seem important. Neither do 10 or 20, but thousands of them create a road. And one day, your thoughts begin following that road automatically.
So maybe I shouldn't judge my progress by asking, how fluent am I today? Maybe I should ask, am I giving my brain another chance to improve today?
Exactly, because your brain never wastes honest practice. Never. Even if today's conversation felt awkward, even if you forgot 5 words, even if you mixed up your grammar, even if you had to stop and think, your brain still learned something. Think about a sculptor carving a huge block of stone. Every strike of the hammer seems small. Sometimes it feels like nothing is changing. Then suddenly, a beautiful shape begins to appear. People admire the final sculpture, but they never count the thousands of tiny strikes that created it. English is your sculpture. Every sentence you speak is another careful strike. Every mistake, another careful strike. Every listening session, another careful strike. Every moment you choose English instead of silence, another careful strike. Don't underestimate small efforts. Great results are often built from things that looked too small to matter.
Anna, can I say something to everyone who's listening? A few hours ago, I believed my biggest problem was vocabulary. Then I thought it was grammar. Then I blamed my confidence. But now I realize my biggest challenge wasn't English. It was the way I trained my brain. And strangely, that makes me feel optimistic. Because if the brain can learn one habit, it can learn another.
That's exactly the lesson I hoped we'd discover together. Before we finish today's episode, I'd like you to remember just one thing. Please don't chase fluency. Chase consistency. Don't chase perfect sentences. Chase honest conversations. Don't wait for confidence before you speak. Speak and allow confidence to quietly grow beside you. Your brain is listening to everything you repeatedly do. If you repeatedly choose fear, it learns fear. If you repeatedly choose silence, it learns silence. But if you repeatedly choose English even for a few minutes every day, your brain eventually accepts a new reality. English is no longer something strange. English becomes familiar, and familiar things no longer feel frightening. So the next time you look in the mirror, don't tell yourself, "I'm not fluent yet." Tell yourself, "My brain is learning a new way to think," because that's the truth. And one ordinary day when you're least expecting it, you'll answer a question, tell a story, share an opinion, laugh at a joke, or have a conversation entirely in English, and only afterward will you realize something extraordinary. You didn't translate. You didn't panic. You didn't ask your brain for permission. You simply spoke. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, you'll discover that the journey you thought was impossible has already become part of who you are. Thank you for spending this time with us today. Keep feeding your brain good English. Keep trusting the process. And remember, every single sentence you speak today is making tomorrow's English speaker a little stronger. We'll see you in the next episode.
Take care, everyone. And from today onward, don't just learn English. Train your brain to live in English. See you next